The New Orleans Saints have a chance to improve to 2-0 on Monday night against the Panthers. Will they consider trading Jameis Winston to the Jets? And three keys to victory in week 2. Let's talk about it right here on the Straight Up Saints podcast.
You're listening to the Straight Up Saints podcast.
What is up, Who Dat Nation? It's your host, Chris Vogel. We're back inside another edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast, brought to you by Scott Fickner. Injury lawyers. You've been injured in any kind of accident, car, truck, 18-wheeler, or hurt offshore. Scott Fickner handles it all. You can give him a call at 504-500-1111 for a free consultation. That's right, a free consultation. They'll always fight for the win. Now, before I get into how the Saints can fight for the win on Monday night against the Carolina Panthers, their first divisional game of the 2023 season, I want to talk about their quarterback situation and how interesting it could get in the coming weeks. Now, coming into this season, we all kind of had the idea, right? You know Derek Carr's the starter, but the Saints have a pretty good backup in Jameis Winston, and it almost feels weird calling him a backup because you know that Jameis Winston could, if he needed to, play all 17 games for an NFL team. He's done it in his career before in terms of being a starter, so you know that there's a comfortability there, and there's also a really good insurance policy in having Jameis Winston. But the insurance policy, maybe the plan changes a bit when other teams around the league have trouble in quarterback situations. And we saw that in week 1 when Aaron Rodgers unfortunately went down with a torn Achilles in the home opener for the Jets, his first game with them. Obviously, it's a terrible situation for Aaron Rodgers. And your first thought is obviously hoping that he makes a full recovery. But after that, teams have a quick period. Like, it's a quick period of kind of being upset about what happened. And then it's back to business. And being back to business is looking around the NFL and saying, okay, is there a quarterback we can get out there on the free agency market? Is there a quarterback via trade that we can acquire? And I think it's only normal to bring up Jameis Winston as one of those names because I think deep down, the Jets aren't ready for Zach Wilson to start. They weren't ready for him to start this year. I don't see how after 1 week things have changed. I think he was the type of quarterback that needed to sit and learn from Rodgers. So if the Jets were to say pick up the phone and call the Saints and see what they'd want for Jameis Winston, I think it's an interesting situation that puts the Saints in a spot where it says, what do you value? Having that kind of premium insurance policy for this season or getting an asset back? Now, I want to argue this about this situation. I don't think the Saints will trade Jameis Winston. I don't believe he's going to get traded to the Jets. But I think if the Saints were to do that, I think this is the type of year and the type of roster that they have where I don't know if you kind of get rid of Jameis Winston for a draft pick. Now, I know people are going to say I'd rather have something than nothing because he's most likely as good as gone next year. But I think if you're New Orleans, what matters more right now is that you assemble the best possible roster to win this season. And especially that you started off the season on a good note, 1-0, you're relatively healthy. I think if you were to move Jameis, I'd be asking more for a depth piece on defense maybe. Maybe a linebacker, maybe a defensive end. Don't even mention offensive line because the Jets don't have a good O-line. And if they did, they probably wouldn't have been in the problem they have in the first place. They wouldn't be in that situation. So, I don't think the Saints will trade Jameis Winston. I don't think the Jets will, pursue him anyway because I think they're better off in their situation. Just going maybe for like a Colt McCoy or someone because they don't have to give anything up. And then, even if they bring in Jameis, does that further complicate matters? I don't think they want to do that to Zach Wilson. I think they'd rather bring in a guy who's not going to threaten him like a Colt McCoy. But let's say the Saints were to, you have that interesting dynamic where it's like, okay, do you want a win now depth piece or do you want the insurance policy of, God forbid, let's say Derek Carr tweaks his ankle and he's out for 2-3 weeks, whatever, that you can plug Jameis in and you feel like you can kind of keep things moving in a positive direction as opposed to years past where, let's say when Jameis did get hurt in 2021, you have Simeon come in and obviously, the losses started piling up. So I think for the Saints, it's an interesting dynamic. I don't think Jameis Winston ends up getting traded. Now, I would be happy for Jameis Winston if a situation presents itself where he can go start and do his thing before he hits free agency next year, because that would obviously be the best case scenario for him personally. But I don't see it. And the other reason I don't see it is because Jake Haener is suspended for 6 games. I think that's the most important part to put into this whole conversation. If Jake Haener wasn't suspended, maybe we have a different conversation because maybe the Saints are like, hey, we feel like we're only going to win this year if Derek Carr is starting. So if he goes down, we still have a backup. It is what it is. But if the Saints don't have Haener for 6 weeks, which is the case because he was suspended, and you do like how Jameis performs, and you feel like he is probably the best plan B that a team can have at the quarterback position, then yeah, sure, I understand keeping him. So I don't think it's an easy decision for New Orleans, but I do think he ends up staying in New Orleans for this year. And I think that's how it ends up going down. So let's move on to the Saints Panthers game because it's a big one. It is absolutely big one. The Saints have not won in Carolina for the past two seasons. 2021 season, they lost 26-7. Jameis took a lot of hits. It was pretty ugly. Last season, they lost 22-14. Baker Mayfield had a pedestrian stat line. Didn't matter. Panthers won. And the Panthers actually beat the Saints in the Dome, despite the fact that Sam Darnold had less than 100 passing yards and 2 interceptions. So they got swept by the Panthers last year. The last 2 years in Carolina, they lost. The last win in Carolina was January 3rd of 2021, which was Drew Brees' final season with the Saints. So they have not won in Carolina in the post-Brees era. That's got to change, obviously. And there's no better time than Monday night for New Orleans. And let's start with the brutal honesty of it, where the Panthers are banged up. The Panthers already, through 1 week, down their starting left guard in Brady Christensen. He's on IR. I believe he's going to be out for the season. And then J.C. Horn, hamstring injury. They haven't put him on IR, but they're saying it's a serious hamstring. He didn't practice Thursday. He's not playing on Monday. I know guys usually have like superhuman strength and recover ridiculously well before a Saints game. He's not playing on Monday. So down the left guard, down the cornerback, that's for starters. They are a young team, a team that had 66 yards worth of penalties on 9 penalties in week 1. And oh yeah, they're starting a rookie quarterback who I think very highly of, Bryce Young, but he's still a rookie quarterback. And I think if you're New Orleans, with the defense you have, a really, really experienced defense, you got to make him feel uncomfortable. Just like the Falcons did in week 1, where Bryce Young had 2 interceptions. He was sacked twice. He was only 20 for 38, so barely completed over 50% of his throws for 146 and a touchdown. Panthers offense on third down, not good, 5 of 14. So I think for New Orleans, I think that this is the matchup where the skid's got to end now, because you're facing a younger team. You're facing a team that I know a lot of people were on the Panthers coming into this year. I've said from the start, Saints, Falcons. That's the way I view it. And those are the 2 best teams in the NFC South, and it's going to come down to those 2 teams. Saints got to really establish themselves in the division and show that they're a player, because the Falcons just beat the Panthers by 2 scores, and they did it pretty effortlessly with their great run game, a really opportunistic defense with Jesse Bates leading the charge in the secondary. Saints got to do the same. Now, it might not look the same, right? They're not going to run the football as well as the Falcons do, because the one thing you got to give the Falcons with Arthur Smith, that run game is dynamic. But defensively, being able to force turnovers. We just saw the Saints last week. 3 interceptions on Tannehill. Was really just in his face the whole day. I did a little breakdown as a joke, and I was saying I thought he saw ghosts. They were in Tannehill's face all game long. He was uncomfortable. Got to do the same against Bryce Young. And when I went back and I rewatched the Falcons-Panthers game to kind of see tendencies with Bryce, there's 2 things I noticed. Because he's young, I think there's a little too much time spent on eyeing the receiver that he won't get away with in the NFL that maybe he could have got away with in college. And 2, both interceptions that he threw, very similar concepts. Over the middle of the field, safety read his eyes, there's your bang-bang play. And for New Orleans, you have the DBs capable of making those plays. Whether it is Marcus May, whether it is Tyrann Mathieu, obviously we know what Lattimore brings to the table. We know what Adebo brings to the table. Same with Alontae Taylor. I think there will be moments there. And just like week 1, the Saints got to come down with those interceptions and flip the field. And if they can do that, they'll put them in a great position. But watching that game, there will be some moments where Bryce makes special plays. Him being at home should help in terms of being a little bit more comfortable, not having to feel that pressure on third down, whether it's going to a silent count. Not that Atlanta fans are going to make you go to a silent count, but things of that nature. He doesn't have to worry about that. That's all kind of scrapped from the concerns when you go into week 2. But he's still a rookie with a subpar supporting cast. The receiving core for me, Adam Thielen and DJ Chark, their best days are over. There's no more DJ Moore to cause fits. You know, I know Laviska Shenault is an interesting playmaker, had a really big play last year against the Saints. That's not the type of guy that you should go into matchup and the Saints start kind of, shaking their head, wondering how the hell we stop them. They should be able to have a plan. As for the running backs, I think the running backs, in terms of having some big plays, I think the Panthers did a pretty good job with that in week 1 against the Falcons. If you go back and you go watch the game, I thought there were moments where Miles Sanders looked good. I thought there were moments where Chuba Hubbard looked good. So for the Saints, that's going to be a big focus, right? You want to put so much pressure on Bryce Young that you make them a one-dimensional offense. But I think the Saints could very well do that because we saw last week, Derrick Henry came out pretty well. 4 carries, 36 yards to start the game. After that, I believe it was 11 more carries for 36 yards, if my math serves me correct. So the Saints did a really good job of adjusting well, whether it was Colin Saunders, whether it was Malcolm Roach, whether it was Demario Davis. Alontae Taylor stepped up a little bit in terms of being a willing tackler. So the Saints did a good job of adjusting to that. And if you can slow down Derrick Henry, you should be able, to some degree, because every back is different. And obviously Miles Sanders and Derrick Henry are 2 different backs. But the point stands, they were able to shut down the run, put more pressure on Tannehill, and the Titans passing game just wasn't able to do it. This is a similar situation where you're versing a quarterback that has to prove himself, a quarterback that doesn't have a lot of dynamic weapons around him, which the Titans certainly didn't have last week. The Saints should be able to really limit this offense. This should not be a Panthers team that's scoring 20-plus points week 2 against the Saints. So where does that lead me? That leads me to the offense, and that leads me to more keys. So if making Bryce Young uncomfortable is an important key, a second key for the Saints, got to keep your quarterback upright. Now, this one is going to be a little bit of a concern because the Falcons did give up 4 sacks to the Panthers last week, and we know what the Panthers can do defensively, whether it is Brian Burns, whether it is Derek Brown, and I think that's where the main focus goes to those former first-round picks for Carolina because they can be game wreckers, and you don't want that to continue. But I think for New Orleans, they just went up against a really, really tough Tennessee D-line where I think that's a really good test because Derek Brown, he's going to really cause fits in the interior. Well, you just had some prior experience with Jeffrey Simmons. We know that Harold Landry can cause, issues on the outside. Arden Key certainly caused issues on the outside for Trevor Penning. Now you're going up against Brian Burns. There's some experience. Week 1 can be an adjustment. I'm not saying the Saints are going to magically fix their O-line, but they have to if they're going to win this game in terms of being a little bit better. Derek Carr, on 38 of the dropbacks, he was pressured 17 times, got hit a good bunch, especially in the first half. Saints adjusted well, right? Chipping the defensive ends, giving Trevor Penning some time. And that's when you saw Derek Carr at your best. And I thought Derek Carr, when I watched it the second time, I had a much better, I'd say, I don't want to say understanding. My opinion of Derek Carr was a lot higher the second time I watched the Saints Titans game than the first time. In live, there's some throws you don't love and this and that. And then you go back to watch and you're like, man, the ball placement outside of the terrible interception was really good, especially considering he was under duress for most of the game. So got to keep your quarterback upright. That would be key number 2. Key number 3, and this does matter, you have to get a better ground game. Because I don't anticipate that Derek Carr is going to throw for 300-plus yards every single game. That's never been who he is in his career. So why is that going to happen now? And that's not the way the Saints were built to. Now, Alvin's got to get back. Obviously, Alvin's return in a couple of weeks from now, that's going to help, no doubt about it. But New Orleans has to get better in run blocking to make sure that Jamal Williams, who didn't have a great debut with the Saints, and Kendra Miller, who practiced on a limited basis Thursday, and I believe, as long as he doesn't have a setback, I believe he will play on Monday, but we'll see what happens. I think those two, that's enough to give you some diversity in the run game, and obviously get Taysom Hill involved. He was not involved nearly enough in week 1. But the blocking needs to be better. I put up a couple of videos. There are moments where Jamal gets the handoff and there's a Titans defender right in his face. So I don't know what he's supposed to do in that situation. I don't know if Alvin slips out of that situation. If Alvin can't, Jamal surely isn't. So the Saints got to be a little bit more balanced in the run game. Falcons, obviously, like I said, that is a run-first team. So the Falcons are going to be able to get theirs, and they certainly did that with over 130 rushing yards against the Panthers. And I'm not saying the Saints need to have 130 rushing yards to win. But the Saints got to be better than what they were in week 1. Because in week 1, if you take out that big Jamal Williams run to ice the game, they were getting nothing on the ground. 18 carries for 45 yards is not ideal. Taysom Hill, in terms of what he was able to do on the ground, not ideal. 3 carries for 4 yards. So that's got to get better. And I really do believe it will. It's not me just saying from the optimistic standpoint. I think what we saw last year, specifically with Trevor Penning, and I'd even say Cesar Ruiz, there are rough moments, but they've bounced back fairly well. In the preseason last year, Trevor Penning started off rough, got better each game. I hope to see progress there. Cesar Ruiz, we know, started his career off rough and then got it going. Those two guys, they got to be better. James Hurst, hopefully he'll be better. He had a rough go. He's kind of the guy that got out of the jam, I would say, in terms of all the criticism on social media. A lot of it is directed towards Penning, not saying it's unwarranted, but Hurst had a bad game and people didn't bring it up. And if you don't believe me, just go back and rewatch. Hurst was not good. The only offensive lineman that genuinely thought played okay was Ramczyk. And even he struggled at times. So that unit has to be better. And I believe they will be better in week 2 against the Panthers. But that's going to be a pretty big key. Now, before I get into why I believe this week 2 game against the Panthers, even though it's just week 2, it's against a team they're going to play twice, why I feel it is so pivotal that the Saints win this game, not just obviously for the standings, but for Dennis Allen's sake, I want to get to a quick word from one of our sponsors, DraftKings.
Can you believe we've had 7 months without an NFL game? Crazy, right? Well, good thing that's over. NFL's here, and DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL, is giving you a can't-miss offer. New customers can get $200 in bonus bets instantly when you bet just $5 on any NFL game. DraftKings is hooking everyone up with game day greatness. Download now and use code BOOT to sign up. New customers can take home $200 in bonus bets instantly just for betting $5. That's code BOOT only on DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. The crown is yours.
Once again, thank you to DraftKings for being part of the program. So, like I said, it's only week 2. And I'm not putting the label must win because the Saints are 1-0. You're feeling good. Vibes are good. And it is a road game. It is a divisional game. And anything happens in these games. So I'm not going to label must win. I think that's ridiculous. What I will say, though, is for Dennis Allen, for the New Orleans Saints locker room, for this team, you want to start proving that you're taking that next step, that you're ready to contend in the NFC. These are games that you got to win. Now, again, if the Saints lose this game, I'm not selling stock on New Orleans. But if they win this game, some of the doubts that you may have, that maybe I have, they start to creep away in a good manner. Because last year, Saints win week 1, they go into Carolina, and they get throttled. Go back to the Jameis season, 2021, beat the Packers, looking good, go into Carolina, get throttled. You beat the Titans week 1, wasn't easy, 16-15. Could have very well lost that game if a ball bounces a different way. Could have very well blown out the Titans had they been a little bit more efficient. Here's your chance. The talent's there for the Saints. And you saw it in week 1. You saw the defensive talent. You saw the offense move the football. They just got to be better in the red zone, and they got to keep Carr protected. And obviously, he has to take care of the football. But there's more talent offensively this year than there was last year. Week 2, Carolina, a team that just lost to Atlanta by double digits. You go in. You win that game against a team that you have not beaten since the 2021 season. And all of a sudden, those concerns about this team falls into those trap games or this team's unable to really sustain consistent winning, that starts to go away. Because remember last year, the Saints were unable to win consecutive games until the end of the year. And by then, it didn't really matter much because they started the year 4-9, which puts you in such a hole that it's very hard to climb out. But all of a sudden, if you beat Carolina and you start 2-0, you go into the Green Bay game and you say, man, we are one more game away from getting Alvin back and one more game away from getting back home. All of a sudden, the optimism, the vibes in that building, they change. And all of a sudden, if you're New Orleans, you start thinking about, can we continue to stack these? And that's something that Dennis Allen talked about in week 1. He said it's a great win, and it counts as one, and now it's about stacking those ones together. Well, here's your chance, Dennis Allen. Be aggressive. Go out there, have another dominant showing defensively. And I think the Saints can do that. That's the one thing I'll never knock Dennis Allen. Always coaches an elite defense. But I want to see it. I want to see it week 2 again against Carolina because they're capable of it. And I want to see a complementary style football game. 16-15 week 1, you take it because week 1 is always so tough. There's so many, unknown variables going into it. You'll take a win however you can get it. Whether you win 16-15 or you beat the crap out of the Giants on primetime 40-0 like the Cowboys. I don't care which way it is. Week 1, you take a win. You go out to week 2, you're grateful for that win. But week 2, you want to start establishing an identity. And I think the Saints got to be a complimentary football team if they're going to be great this year. And I think they can. The talent is there. But you got to beat the Panthers. Because if you lose to the Panthers, then it's like, okay, let's say you go beat Green Bay on the road. Do I know if you're going to follow up with a back-to-back win after that against Tampa Bay? Or if you lose that, do all of a sudden, are you 1-2 going back home in week 4? There's levels to this. So I'm not saying it's must win. What I am saying, though, if you want people like me, if you want people like maybe you to stop doubting whether or not Dennis Allen can sustain consistency in New Orleans, you got to go beat an opponent that, frankly, you should beat. And honestly, the Saints should win this game by at least 7. By at least. Now, again, I would take a win in any way it comes, but you got to be able to show some dominance and some assertiveness, and especially against a team that doesn't have a good O-line like Carolina. So we'll see what happens, and I'll make my prediction in just a minute. But, man, you win in week 2, all of a sudden things feel a little bit better. You're 2-0, and you're saying if 10's the magic number, got to go 8-7 and finish the season. You pretty much, worst case, play 500 ball the rest of the year. You're going to get into the playoffs. That's just how it works sometimes. And we've seen teams do it before. Now, before I get into my prediction, I want to get into our last sponsor of the show, Crystal Hot Sauce.
I need to clear something up about New Orleans. While our culinary scene might be on fire, our food has never been about heat. It's always been about flavor. And this is how New Orleans does flavor. Are we clear? Crystal. How New Orleans does flavor.
And thank you to Crystal for being part of the program. So I said prediction, I'll put it out there. This is what I think should happen. Not that it's going to, what I think should happen. Saints have the better defense. Saints have the more experienced quarterback. Saints have the more, I'd say, win now ready roster, I would put. Their defense travels well. I think the Saints should win this game, honestly, somewhere around 24 to, I'll go 13. That's what they should win. Will they? Who knows? But this is the type of game that they should win 24 to 13. And I'd like to see them win in that manner and play complimentary football and move to 2-0. And all of a sudden you're looking at teams differently. But if you do lose this game, then it comes back into, is this the third year in a row? Nice win to open the season. And then you lose at Carolina. And then what happens after that? You don't want to get into that. Start 2-0, which the Saints haven't been able to do the last couple seasons, and have some really, really good mojo for the rest of the year. And I think that would pay dividends for them. But we'll see what happens, guys. As always, let me know what your prediction is for this upcoming game between the Saints and the Panthers. Who's your X factor? Would love to hear that as well. How do you see this one playing out? Again, I think the Saints should win this game by 10, 11 points, but we'll see. It's Monday night. You never know. Divisional game. Dennis Allen's got to prove it to me that he can start off with a 2-0 record, but they are more than capable of it. And I won't, just because I have my doubts, I won't say they're going to lose or predict that they're going to lose, because they should win this game. And I'd like to see them get it done. So again, guys, that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. But as always, make sure you guys send your comments on this upcoming game, your predictions, and I'll definitely get back to them in the comments section below. But until then, that's going to wrap it up. As always, subscribe to Boot Crew Media's YouTube page and stay tuned for more content here on the Straight Up Saints podcast, the destination for the Who Dat Nation.